Next up, we have Celeste Stragand. She is our next expert in examining the future of transportation. She is a mobility strategist for the Ford Motor Company, and the topic of her presentation is a perspective on mobility.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and hello, Rams and Ram fans. I'm Celeste Davis Stragand, mobility strategist within City Solutions Division of Ford Mobility. As such, I work with cities, municipalities, and DOTs to solve transportation challenges and to future vision the mobility of tomorrow. So what's driving change? What's transportation going to look like in 2020 and beyond? For the first time in history, more than half the world's population is living in cities. That means 50% of the world's population today lives in those cities, and the number is expected to grow to 70% by mid-century. You'll notice on this chart, an interesting thing to consider is that the United States ranks higher than many other parts of the world in its urbanization. People like to live in and near cities. They're a powerful tool for driving the growth and progress of human civilization by maximizing human connections. This is accomplished through human connection, shared knowledge, resources, and labor, or agglomeration. It's the reason for the increase in megacities or megalopolis, and in 2030, experts project that there will be at least 41 megacities worldwide. A lot of that is due to that center graph where you'll notice that productivity increases tremendously when you have those shared resources. Nodding to the work of Michael Batty, cities are largely unpredictable because they are more complex systems. They're more like organisms than machines. And really, ultimately, you have an ecosystem made up of systems, hence the system of systems. We have our morphology of place, our culture of place, and our technology of place. So let's transition a second and figure out how this all came to be. We had our first industrial revolution that began with the inventions of steam and iron, resulting in the railroad. From there, you have a migration from agriculture to towns and city clusters that were centered around these railroads where you had clusters of goods delivery. The second industrial revolution, we have our internal combustion engine and electricity. With that, Henry Ford developed the mass production of private vehicles. An infrastructure developed subsequently to create networks of local highways and interstates, creating urban cores and allowing for suburban sprawl because everybody had a car so they could drive to and from their home to the city central core. We're in the midst right now of our third industrial revolution, our era of globalization, which started with the personal computer and now our handheld computer, our cell phone. And presently, we're experiencing a lot of data-driven infrastructure and dynamic changes to urban activity. But how does this affect our coevolution and adaptation to this technology? Well, in our first and second industrial revolutions, technology resulted in a change in morphology or the infrastructure of place, and then ultimately led to a change in culture. So we had steam and iron in the first industrial revolution. We had the internal combustion engine and electricity in the second. The first one resulted in our railroads and our light rail. We had markets and town clusters. The second resulted in highways and interstates. So we ended up with cities, urban cores, suburbia, and a car for everyone. What's happening now is a little bit interesting and different. In our third industrial revolution, we see changes that are happening to our culture, but our physical world or the morphology is still trying to shift. So our technology advances through the cell phone, Internet of Things, and a smart vehicle are advancing at very fast speeds. Our culture is ready for the on-demand. And I want to pick up my phone, I want to get my food delivered, I want someone to pick me up, take me to where I'm going, and have everything just work seamlessly. Unfortunately, we don't have all of our infrastructure in place for that. I can buy an EV vehicle, charging stations don't proliferate throughout the United States yet. If I want to get to an autonomous vehicle, we don't have all the infrastructure yet. So you can see that there's been a shift here, which is really kind of interesting. And legacy hardware is not keeping up with the service demands. So how do we harmonize this dilemma? And what does that mean for cities? It means our streets could be safer, traffic is getting worse, and many people are unable to access transportation. Unfortunately, each city has a unique character, and so it's not a cookie cutter solution for each and every one. Cities are already experiencing lots of congestion, causing a mobility paradox, which is really where they want to continue growing, but they're also reaching a breaking point in terms of being able to move freely throughout the space. So what does this mean for Ford? Well, in 2011, our chairman, Bill Ford Jr., said things in a TED Talk that were both prophetic and heretical for the scion of a car company. He said that Ford Motor Company will work with cities and others to not just deliver smart cars, but also smart roads and infrastructure, all while still delivering on Henry Ford, our founder's vision of freedom of movement drives human progress. Earlier, we addressed urban population and congestion. In addition, cities are dealing with water and energy supply, extreme weather events, which those in Fort Collins know unfortunately all too personally with the fires that have occurred. We also have industry, new technologies. All of these things are affecting a city's morphology. So what does this mean? We need to bring the human element to the forefront. So we start to understand what is desirable, meaningful, and useful to people, and use that understanding to build products and services which service those real human needs. Since 2016, Ford has been exploring what humans need in their mobility systems. Through this human-centered design, a big finding has been that any mobility product is only as good as the context in which it operates. People will only walk or bike if it feels safe. Commuting by bus or car can only be as good as the traffic that day. So the design of our streets, the morphology of place, has a huge impact on the human experience. I like this quote because it emphasizes trade-offs and the human side of mobility. The solutions to the challenges that commuters face aren't just about products or services. It's truly understanding human needs and use, and then creating the right solutions designed around users supported by technology. It all comes back to that system of systems and who this is affecting. So what are those visionary trends for 2025? We're at a futures conference, right? I'd like to leave you with some ideas and trends for the future. People are continuing to move to cities. We are seeing an increase in the draw to the urban core. I know that with COVID, we've seen a little bit of variance where like New York and San Francisco have seen some exodus, but ultimately the trend is continuing, and we project into 20 and 25 that this will continue. Cities will also need to be nimble due to this increasing technology. When they go to do resurfacing of roads and revamping of their public works projects, the integration of thoughtful technology is going to be necessary so we have the benefits of all of the technology and transportation that's occurring right now. We also have an aging population that's becoming increasingly relevant, especially in the Denver metro area. 1 in 4 will be over the age of 60 by 2040. How are these people going to continue to move? What types of paratransit services or automated services do we need to bring to the forefront so we can ensure that people have this ability to go from point A to point B? We also see economic and social inequity will continue to grow. With respect to the future economy, we see the sharing economy and shared behaviors continuing through agglomeration. Climate pressures, fortunately, as we all know, look at the air quality, will continue to prompt infrastructure changes, and housing continues to be a high demand, scarce resource. So how we interplay with our zoning and our housing and our land use strategy, that directly affects our transportation. With the future of work, we see telecommuting increasing and likely a hybrid process ultimately flattening out, where people go into the office maybe a few days out of the week, stay at home the rest of it. We see work becoming increasingly digital and automated, as well as freelancing, contract, or your gig culture increasing. With respect to urban system trends, digital innovation is outpacing our physical environment. We've talked about that through our morphology of place and the technology that's happening in this third industrial revolution. Data is also continuing to grow in importance along privacy concerns. So with contact tracing and COVID, people are having to make this trade-off of what privacy they're willing to give up for the benefit of the good, or just for the benefit of turning on my ways and being able to get from point A to point B and having someone tell me the directions. And over 200 million people are willing to make that trade-off of privacy so they can get their request on demand. With respect to the future of city governance, financial pressures on cities are expanding. There are more and more services being needed by more and more people in the center, and they're going to start looking for alternative financing, especially in the wake of COVID and the impacts that are going to be affecting us for the next 5 years moving forward. Cities are going to have to be thoughtful about reduced tax revenue and sales tax, how they're going to continue moving their services, and is that looking to the private sector? We also see infrastructure will be increasingly digitized and monetized. So whether that be through tolling, road use charging, or curb access, those are some trends that we see into the future. The future of mobility will also be more people taking daily trips, and they're densifying clusters. And what I mean by that is that there's a lot of articles and a lot of trends right now on the 15-minute city. So you're starting to see your suburban areas densify with all of the needs for a family, whether that be the change in healthcare from hospitals to medical office buildings, and you're seeing little emergency centers pop up, or your change in access to the grocery store and your little pantry markets popping up as well. That's going to couple likely with an increased commute time. So going back to that land use and zoning and housing being more expensive, people are traveling further distances. And with our built out interstate system and highways, you're able to travel a further distance in less time. So we see that trend there. Micromobility is becoming increasingly popular. Scooters and their form factors, we see those continuing to change. There's the stand-up, there's the sit-down, there's pedal bikes, there's e-bikes. We continue to see project that there's going to be continued modernization and innovation with respect to those as well. Private automobile ownership rates, we see those declining. We see more and more people looking for other options. What are other ways to get from A to B? And this hybrid work culture, if you're able to work from home a few days a week, is there a need for 2 cars in the family? That type of trend, we're going to continue to watch and see how that plays out. We also see parking costs increasing with on-street availability declines. Again, going back to that immediate goods delivery service, people want their goods immediately. Well, if you're in a downtown urban core and you're looking for, you've got, your DoorDash and your Uber Eats and your Grubhub all in front of you, as well as 5 different TNCs or transportation network companies, or Ubers and Lyfts, all trying to access that curb. How are cities going to monetize that for their benefit, knowing that we've seen sales tax decreases? So these are just a few projections for the future and how that relates to this Futures Conference. And so really what I want to leave you with is, where do we go from here? The future is ripe for opportunity. We're in a state of change. We look to you, our future leaders of tomorrow, to work with us, and let's solve these problems and figure it out. Thank you so much for having me. And if you have any questions, I look forward to hearing them.
Thank you so much, Celeste. You hit on a lot of the high points on this topic. We do still have a few questions for you, though. A few of the questions are actually related to COVID and the pandemic and trends related to that. We'll start with this one. With COVID, we are seeing a possible change in the urbanization trends where, because of evolution of networks, locality may become more of a choice than a necessity. Companies, especially IT like Microsoft and Intel, my husband works for Intel, are already embracing this new paradigm. What does it mean for mobility requirements? And there's more. Have the recent events changed your considerations, and to which degree? So we'll start with that. You're on mute, Celeste.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, great. So while we are seeing some of your IT companies saying that, yes, you can work from home, we still don't see agglomeration going away or the benefits of that. So yes, locality is becoming something that is more of a choice factor. And even at Ford, we're not going to go back to work, I don't think, until I'm 100% remote to start with. And we wouldn't be going back until, I think, June or July. With that, though, we still see the need for commutes. What we're going to start seeing, I think, is some pattern changes. So again, going to that 15-minute city, instead of having maybe like your peak times of travel that we've had before, you're going to start to see a little bit more of a flattening out, which with respect to a multimodal transportation system and micromobility and microtransit tying into your transit system, as well as your whatever other new form factor of transportation that comes out, I think you're going to start to see more of a leveling out of those peaks and valleys, and those trips are going to be changing, just like the increase in cycling that we've seen. People are moving differently because they can, and they have that option because they are working from home. But I don't think that everybody is going to work from home. I mean, really at the high end of that, you might see like 30% of the population. And again, that would just affect those peaks and valleys of travel time.
Okay, thank you. Kind of along the same lines, and you mentioned this in your presentation about this idea of people moving or not moving into or away from cities. You mentioned that the trend is people are moving into cities, and that doesn't really seem to be changing. Is it too early to really tell that? Like, do we think that maybe further down the road, if this stays how it is, will the cities lose population?
Man, I don't know. I mean, I think that's one that we could wait for a really long time. We are seeing some trends, like I said, in San Francisco and in New York, we are seeing some decreases. I would argue that Colorado is seeing some uptick from that. People are saying, I don't want to live there, but I'll come live here. It's a smaller city, but it still gives me that city access because you have that culture and you have the, again, that agglomeration, that shared resources, the ability to connect into an urban core if and when you need to. I know that there were some Midwest cities also that were offering benefits and saying, hey, come move to our city. We'll pay you a set fee if you'll come actually move here now that you're working remotely. We might see some trends like that. It's still a little early to speculate exactly how that's going to shake out. But I think I would say the overarching theme that we're seeing, at least from what I've been reading and different colleagues that I've been speaking to, is we think that the cities will continue to grow.
Okay, and do we have time for one more? Okay, last one, not COVID related. What is the biggest falsehood about self-driving cars, and how is Ford overcoming it?
Wow, that's a great question, and I'm going to have to get back to you. I am not the AV expert on our team, so I'd love to kind of gather that person's information if I can, if we can work together and I can get that, and then I can definitely reach back out to you.
Okay, great. So we will get, we know who asked that, so we can get back to that person as well. All
Great,
right.
thank you.
And that's all we have time for questions for Celeste. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.